Is anything on the internet free?
Nothing is free.
We live in an attention economy.
The harvest and directing of attention is even a more powerful system than capitalism.
Attention. No one puts anything on the internet without the hope of getting some. It's become a fossil fuel bought and sold in a parallel economy where all you need to trade is a device. But unlike money, you can't save attention, which makes it much more valuable. You can spend it on something meaningful or waste it staying up late playing video games as I just have. These are the attention brokers, but you already know them by name. They introduced us, and until we move to another platform, we'll always oversee our relationship.
What is social media to you?
New platforms where your time and attention is the primary thing they're extracting to sell.
They want your attention too and compete with each other and your own best interests to siphon it off with free content.
What we're fighting for is eyeballs, which we create up and sell to advertisers.
We think of their services as being free.
There will always be a version of Facebook that is free.
But is that really true? Each time you log on, your attention is being taxed by a bunch of unchosen ads and recommended content.
Ultimately, we end up paying anyhow, whether it's our state of distracted minds.
The cost of time spent is incredible.
Its desire is to maximize your time on site. It's an agent that's using you.
My feed shows me a mixture of podcasts, MMA knockouts, and tattoo videos. Not because I've opted into any of these or even like them, to be honest, because a machine has learned it's what I'm most likely to respond to. So why is the internet so good at distracting us? Well, it's because it turns out there's not one, but actually two competing ways to get our attention.
One type is what you're doing now, internal, goal-directed attention. We're not totally driven based on what's going on in our environment. And this is also known as top-down attention. The other type of attention is external, stimulus-driven. If there's something very novel, like a loud sound or something very important, will pull you away from whatever you're doing. This is also known as bottom-up attention. Every interaction you have with the environment is really a merging of these two forces.
You could think of your attention like the ball in a soccer game. If you have possession, your opponent needs to take it off you because it can only be in one place at a time. The goal of your social media feed, or recommendations then, is to shun your focus away from your goal-driven system and onto a stimulus-driven track. And whenever it succeeds, it's actually you who's being consumed, not the content.
On the internet, on social media, the product is you.
Whether we like it or not, creators like me are all competing with each other and your to-do list for your limited time, and grow and get paid roughly in proportion to how much of it we can acquire. As a result, instead of being able to focus 100% on the quality of our message, we're also dragged into an arms race using escalating presentation tactics that grab and hold attention whilst pumping out a never-ending stream of content.
Your first 5 to 10 seconds of your video matter the most.
The sweet spot to maximize earnings. Keep chasing the views.
You're incentivized to get people to interact as much as possible. What you really want is for them never to go away.
In fact, helping your audience too much could even be bad for business if it stopped them wanting to come back for more.
The organization's desire to keep perpetuating itself ends up being a perverse incentive if it's trying to solve a problem, or if it really solved it, it obsolete itself, and it becomes a basis to just manage the problem forever because it gets some power by doing so.
The term providing value gets tossed around like salad on a rickshaw.
Add value to others.
Value.
Deliver value. Add more value.
Adding more value.
And it's often the justification given for the success of a piece of content.
Well, you're making money, it provides value.
A better question to ask is, value compared with what? You've been watching this video for a few minutes now, and while I appreciate that, you're not getting a second of that time back. So the value of one video shouldn't just be compared with other videos, but against every single other thing you could be doing with your time. So far we've explored how and where distraction happens. But does my habit of wasting time online point to a deeper need that's being unfulfilled? Pre-industrial life sucked pretty hard compared to what we have now. But would a prehistoric artist need the Pomodoro technique to finish a painting? Or would a medieval farmer read Sir David Goggins to muster the motivation to milk a cow?
Stay hard.
Sure, looming starvation and no Wi-Fi were probably the real agrarian productivity hacks, but did these guys have another advantage we're missing because it's literally right in front of our eyes? Regular people didn't have mirrors at home till the 19th century, so unless you found a clear bit of water to fix your hair in, you wouldn't know how you looked. The only way to self-reflect at all would be through hanging out with other people. In Others in Mind, Philip Roche says, receiving attention and then sharing attention on something external, like a toy, is how infants begin to form self-awareness.
Since this little boy has to wait for his mother's company, she provides a substitute, on whom he practices.
Although young kids are spontaneous and uninhibited until around age 6, they gradually learn that by suppressing their impulses, they gain some control over how others treat them. This coincides with the rapid growth of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, an area of the brain that simulates social consequences. But why is this so important?
This executive system is there to help you self-regulate your behavior to anticipate the social future, because we do something very few species do. We cooperate, we reciprocate, but most importantly, we keep score.
Growing up, we gain the privilege and curse of being able to reflect both upon ourselves, but also as an object through the eyes of others. But mirrors gave us a nice shortcut to this previously social process. Instead of just relying on other people's responses to figure out who we were, suddenly there was this instantaneous, objective, and solitary tool for self-evaluation. Since the 1900s, there's been an explosion of so-called mirrors in the world. Photography and social media are the obvious ones, but how about credit ratings, work evals, weight, height, exam scores, salaries, or gym personal bests? Unless you live in a cave, it's very hard to avoid some kind of feedback on your worth as a human being. As such, we spend large amounts of time imagining past and future encounters, musing about our impact, arranging our appearance in the confines of bathrooms, Roche says. Or as Viktor Frankl famously said, we confound the dignity of man with mere usefulness.
24 potentially monetizable hours in which each individual is imagined to be an entrepreneur. We submit even our leisure for numerical evaluation via likes on Instagram, checking on its performance like one checks a stock, monitoring the ongoing development of our personal brand.
But what if we feel like we don't quite measure up? For many people, myself included, facing down this gap between our inner potential and the reality check mirrored back from outside creates a low-grade stress I call evaluation fatigue.
There's a lot of people out there that they have a dream, and the pressure of trying to reach that dream seems too far off.
Thus, the projects I procrastinate most on are not necessarily the big or difficult ones, but those that involve a potentially dignity-damaging future evaluation. Which is why writing the script takes so long, but walking to the kitchen to make my third coffee is no problem. Fortunately, $2 billion industries are there to help. There's self-improvement on the one hand, showing us how to live our best lives, and if that doesn't work out, there's always ice cream and binge watching to help us forget about it altogether. As Venkatesh Rao of Ribbon Farm explains, when I slump in front of the TV and watch whatever's served up, it becomes an occasion for self-disgust, and there's no great pleasure while in the trance either, so why do I do it? I think because the passivity is a release from the need for control. This feeling of escaping from the pressures of life is what Natasha Schill calls the machine zone.
The machine zone, it was something I kept hearing over and over again. It's a state, a mental state in which time falls away, space falls away, and sometimes even a sense of self. And we hear this a lot sometimes from athletes or dancers or painters talking about getting in the zone. And they mean something somewhat similar to that. You'll see people just in their devices. And interestingly, when you're in the zone, that's what you're playing for. You're not sitting there playing to win. This is an extreme misperception.
According to psychologist Roy Baumeister, the purpose of distracting habits then is to escape the increasingly overburdened, embarrassed, and shameful modern self. But it would be very naive to blame technology for all the anxieties of modern life. It's very likely our ancestors felt the pressure of social evaluation too, because they had some fascinating ways of dealing with it that we've forgotten about in modern secular times. Anthropologist Donald E. Brown has spent his career studying traits that are universal across all human groups.
People everywhere were concerned with what other people thought about them.
But also on his list were group music, dance, and other conscious-altering techniques. Could it be that these hold a key to relieving social stress? From a wedding jig to a soccer chant, group rhythmic entrainment is a powerful hack that allows the painful self to be put aside in favor of the joy of solidarity. Neuroscientist Arne Dietrich calls this the transient hyperfrontality hypothesis.
Transient because all altered states of consciousness come back out into a normal state of consciousness. Hyperfrontality means that prefrontal cortex must be downregulated. The prefrontal cortex computes some very fancy mental faculties. We can self-reflect. That is a very complicated computation. In an altered state of consciousness, the sense of self disintegrates.
His research found that altered states induced by group ritual, as well as techniques like meditation, all downregulate activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, inhibiting self-conscious social rumination and providing pleasurable ego loss, social connection, and bonding. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is the area of the brain that limits our behavior to control how we come across to others. While the word ritual might conjure up images of dancing around a fire naked, covered in sheep's blood, there might be a modern alternative. To me, they sound a lot like flow states, popularized by psychologist Csikszentmihalyi.
The flow experience, a mental state where you feel that you're not doing your ordinary everyday routines. This is so intense an experience that it feels almost as if it didn't exist. Actually, our nervous system is incapable of processing more than about 110 bits of information per second. When you are really involved in this completely engaging process of creating something new, he doesn't have enough attention left over to monitor how his body feels or his problems at home. His identity disappears from his consciousness, essentially a stepping into an alternative reality.
To test if flow states do indeed have similar effects on the brain to ritual states, Xuan Yu et al. Put a bunch of freestyle rappers into an fMRI machine.
Researchers took fMRI scans of 12 rappers while they rapped memorized bars versus a freestyle. When you're riffing on the spot, the parts of the brain in orange are the areas that are more active. These are the areas that are connected to organization, motivation, and integration. Meanwhile, the parts of the brain that second guess, focus on perfection, and overthink are less active than the other parts.
So while flow is usually seen as a way of improving performance, what if it was what it took away from us, not what it added, that was the real benefit? How much of our evolved need to connect to one another through ritual and flow states has been replaced by entertainment that is largely solitary?
They use it to create community and contact and culture. Not to upfund and diminish their consciousness, but to raise their consciousness. The addictive use is just the opposite. The addictive use is to escape from pain, and it's alone, and it's not communal.
Perhaps these values are not entirely cultural, but somehow inherent. And those of us that grow up without them might try to synthesize those values by becoming successful, or by becoming a heroin addict, by becoming a devoted athlete, or by hanging around strip clubs.
As societies have become larger and more advanced, opportunities for flow and ritual have become things we consume rather than participate in. For example, listening to music rather than making it, or watching a show rather than dancing. These were standard restorative practices in ancestral life, but frequently left out in modern times. Addiction expert Natasha Schull writes, "All humans seek an intoxicating experience of the moment outside of time in which the pressures of life are suspended. So is beating off to the Miami Beachwear show or playing Minecraft for hours just as good as meditating or praying in church? Well, there are three distinctions that make some flow activities addictive rather than healthy.
One important factor is the solitude. It's just you alone and the machine. Another really important factor is the continuity. And the third one is speed. It doesn't really leave you any room to think or be in time and space.
For example, rituals such as this Sufi whirling ceremony give devotees the experience of flow, but also have a clear structure, are performed in a group and only on special occasions. These features allow participants to enjoy the benefits without becoming hooked on the high of the experience. Rituals don't have to involve donning white robes and joining a cult either. According to a study published in the Journal of Family Psychology, families with rituals and predictable routines raised young children with fewer respiratory illnesses and better overall health, and they performed better in school and had more interaction with their grandparents. Adolescents reported a stronger sense of self, and couples reported happier marriages. Another University of Michigan report followed American children from 1981 to 1997 and discovered the amount of time children spent eating meals at home was the single biggest predictor of better academic achievement and good behavior, more so than time spent in school, at study, or even playing sports. Speaking of which, engaging in a ritual before a potentially high-anxiety task has been shown to help athletes focus.
John Henderson's ritual turns this convention on its head by having his assistant team trainer slap him in the face prior to every game.
If you're making something, be it a painting or a business, you could also consider not taking it so personally.
Look at me! Look at me!
The idea that creative work is a form of self-expression is actually relatively new. Before the Enlightenment, society viewed creators as just tools operated by a higher power. For example, the ancient Greeks believed muses visited a poet while he worked, so if he turned out a dud, it wasn't his fault, but if he wrote a banger, it's not like he could boast either. Maybe this seems a little superstitious, but it did have some practical advantages. If a creator starts over-identifying with his work, he can be criticized or lauded not only for his skill, but simply for who he is, Keith Johnstone says. So maybe the path to true effectiveness is different from what we've been shown. Rather than taking oneself seriously and fighting to optimize every second of the day, instead making time for structured group flow-inducing activities like a 5 rhythms class or singing in a choir, things that are playful with no intrinsic pressure on evaluation or performance, that allow the prefrontal cortex to switch off and recharge somewhat. Or you could find an empty MRI machine to practice your freestyle rapping in. If you're affected by any of the issues raised in this video and would like more help, check out the links in the description. Thanks for your time.